Thank you for coming to the AFRI Converse 2023 first special edition Human Capital Development in Africa commemorating the Hideyo Noguchi Africa Prize co-sponsored by the Cabinet Office, JICA and UNDP. I will be serving as today's MC from UNDP Africa Bureau, the TICAD Liaisons Expert. My name is Kondo. Now, AFRI Converse, this event is a advocacy event that started in 2018 concerning TICAD. We will be picking up various topical agendas related to African development, and we will be inviting various speakers in various areas to enhance understanding and collaboration related to Africa. And this event is related to TICAD 8, which was held in August of last year, where the award ceremony was held for the 4th Hideyo Noguchi Africa Prize. And we have invited the laureates to talk about the importance of health, which was service due to COVID, and also what is necessary for the human capital development amongst the biomedical researchers in Africa and policymakers and health experts as well, what the community has been doing in order to deal with this unprecedented crisis. And through the Hideyo Noguchi Africa Prize, as well as the government aid projects in from the Japanese government, what kind of contribution can be done? This will be discussed. Today we have people from Japan, Africa as well. We have online viewers as well as people in the venue. So those of you who are here and as well as the online viewers, there will be Japanese and English translation. And at the panel discussion, at the very end, there will be Q&A as well. So those of you here in the venue, please raise your hands if you have a question. And those of you participating online, do place the Q&A function. So I hope that you enjoy the 2-hour event. First, we would like to invite our Vice Minister from the Cabinet Office, Mr. Kawahiroshi, for opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. It is a great pleasure for me to invite the laureates of the 4th Hideyo Noguchi Africa Prize into Japan for the commemorative symposium. And at this symposium, we will be reviewing the various measures and assistance provided by the Japanese government and the United Nations for human capital development in the African health sector, share the achievements, case studies, and lessons learned from the 4th Hideyo Noguchi Africa Prize laureates in this field, and find a way forward in terms of issues to be addressed and new actions to be taken in the future. As you may be aware, the Japanese government has long contributed both materially and spiritually to raising the level of healthcare in Africa. And this is not mere a charity or support as an outsider, just providing funds, but it is rather a history of cooperation through mutual suffering and sweating and first-hand experience of the current situation in Africa. So there is a history of cooperation that we have been sharing. And the pioneer of that was Dr. Hideyo Noguchi. And that is the reason why the Japanese government has an international prize named after him. At the 4th Hideyo Noguchi Africa Prize award ceremony that was held in Tunisia last August on the occasion of the TICAD 8, Prime Minister Kishida made the following remarks in his congratulatory address. As the problem of COVID-19 continues and the whole world is affected, we need to make long-lasting efforts to strengthen the global health architecture, and that is why I would like to honor those who have devoted themselves wholeheartedly to medical research and medical services in Africa, such as Dr. Noguchi, who once went to Africa to save people suffering from yellow fever. We would like to improve the health and welfare of Africa and humanity as a whole. From that perspective, the Hideyo Noguchi Africa Prize will play a major role. In light of the recent award of the Hideyo Noguchi Africa Prize, the Japanese government will continue to promote efforts to strengthen global health architecture. And that is what he said. Furthermore, in 2019, at the 3rd award ceremony, the late former Prime Minister Abe made a speech. He also expressed his hope that the spirit of Dr. Hideyo Noguchi would spread further throughout the world and that the international community will devote more of its attention and resources to medical research and health issues in Africa. And this year, as the G7 hosting country, the Japanese government intends to do its utmost in this global fight against COVID-19 infections, which will be a threat to human security. COVID-19 and other pandemics have revealed the vulnerability of health systems not only in Africa but around the world and the pitfalls of globalism. But this should not be reflected on Africa, which still faces many social issues such as poverty, unstable politics and security, and inadequate health and hygiene. Japan has been working to solve social issues facing Africa, particularly in the health sector, in a way that is unique to Japan. Since 2008, the Hideyo Noguchi Africa Prize has been recognizing and honoring those who contribute to the fight against infectious and other diseases in Africa. And the Hideyo Noguchi Africa Prize has been ahead of the curve in this approach in the era of COVID-19. We hope that the discussions at the symposium with the Noguchi Prize laureates will lead to continued efforts to improve health and welfare of the people living in Africa and to humanity overall. And lastly, I would like to express my sincere congratulations and respect once again for the great accomplishments of this year's laureates. Thank you very much for your attention. Vice Minister Tawa, thank you very much. Next, we would like to ask for introductory remarks from Dr. Kurokawa Kiyoshi, Chairperson of the JNP Committee and Professor Emeritus of Tokyo University. Dr. Kurokawa, please.
Thank you very much for joining us. On behalf of the fourth Hideyo Noguchi Africa Prize Committee, I shall report on the selection process and the achievements of the laureates. 2 years ago, based on the large number of recommendations from across the world, this is the fourth, but first of all, in the medical research and medical services categories, the respective recommendation committee shortlisted the candidates, and then at our level, we had to screen further. And as of March last year, the prize committee reached the conclusion that in the medical researchers category, from the Center for the AIDS Program of Research in South Africa, CAPRISA, Director Dr. Salim S. Abdul Karim, and the Associate Director, Dr. Karasha Abdul Karim, was selected. For the medical services category, Carter Center was founded by former President Carter of the United States. The program led by Carter Center in partnership with African stakeholders. It was an international campaign. The Guinea worm eradication program was selected. It seems that indeed it has been eradicated, but they were selected as the most suitable. We recommended to the Prime Minister, and as of last June, the Prime Minister made the decision. So this was a joint award to a couple in the medical research category, and in the medical services category, this was an organization team-led program. A joint award or a group laureate were both the first for this prize. So firstly, the Karims. In the HIV treatment and prevention, they made a particularly important contribution. They are epidemiologists, particularly in Africa. HIV and tuberculosis co-infection is widely prevalent in Africa, and ART, antiretroviral therapy and early start was found to be useful, and they have identified how young African women get infected. There was very careful analysis about how they get infected, the route of the transmission. I think this was particularly important, and with careful analysis, they have proved it could be reduced by their method. It was a huge contribution. By 2002, they established a research institute for AIDS program in Africa together with international cooperative partners, and this has become a crucial hub of AIDS study in Africa. And in some of the African countries, there was strong denial that there is nothing like AIDS. Even the top leaders of the government denied the existence of such a disease like AIDS. But despite such hardship, they pushed through. They proved that there is a disease of AIDS, and also they have cultivated researchers for more than 20 years. They have strongly worked on the cultivation of human capital as well. And therefore, we strongly felt that their contribution was massive under the denial of top leaders of African governments. It was so difficult, but they had the fortitude. It was not a normal environment. Under strong denial and strong resistance, that they pushed through, and that I think was so crucial. And next, about the Guinea worm disease eradication, it seems it really has gone away. But let me introduce their achievement. So this is caused by the lack of access to safe drinking water. It is a parasitic infection, and this has long tormented the poorest communities in Africa. There are many who have suffered debilitating disease. This is a typical neglected tropical disease. To eradicate this, there is no silver bullet medication. Clean running water is fine, but stagnant water, this is the problem. So enlightenment of using clean water, that's the difficulty. It's not easy to access clean water all the time. And the Carter Center, founded by President Carter, he is 98 and doing fine, according to what I hear. But President Carter, of course, was a wonderful man. Apologies for my digression, but Mr. Carter, President, he was strongly advocating nuclear. And when Fukushima incident occurred, I got to know further, but there was a 3 Mile Island incident back in the US, and he was still an incumbent, and he was an expert of a nuclear power plant and an incumbent president. He was very rapid in his response, and I also served as the chair of the investigation committee, so I have a strong familiarity with President Carter. But this Carter Center was founded by President Carter. It's wonderful that he's doing fine at 98. So we selected this program, and together with many partners, and for many long years, they have engaged in the community of Africa. I think that was the crucial aspect. And this Guinea worm disease, by 2021, by 2 years ago, before that, there was an estimated number of annual cases of 3.5 million, but it went down and down and down. And by 2021, it was only 15. And more recently, the annual case was 13. So that was the massive drop. And more than 50 million cases were averted. And it is likely that it indeed will be eradicated. So in this way, guinea worm disease might become the first parasitic infection and the second human disease after smallpox in history to be eradicated, to be wiped off the earth. So this is a huge contribution. In that regard, it's so important, and the program is still ongoing in 5 African countries. At our selection committee, the highly appreciated aspects is as follows. Regarding Drs. Karim, back at the time, there was strong skepticism that HIV virus is the cause of AIDS, but despite that, they proved by the studies, they spent so many years, they were devoted to their empirical researches, they staked their professional careers because the government were denying. Leaders were in denial. They were under serious risk as professionals, but they continued their, their contribution. They continued to tell the world. They demonstrated their knowledge. They made a scientific proof, a massive contribution. The Guinea worm eradication program, again, they were very successful in the coordination between the local communities and the external support. This was, again, a long-term effort by the Carter Center and the partners. So, what to do about the governance, how to engage with the local community. Again, this was a very long effort and enlightenment of the local communities, governance. They had to overcome so many difficulties, including social infrastructure development, and this was another wonderful program. And as I have been repeating, there's only some 10 something or so patients. And just like polio, it is very likely to be the second human disease to be eradicated, a massive contribution. So, in that regard, there were so many candidates, but as the selection committee, we have chosen these laureates, and we are also very happy to be able to select such wonderful persons and teams. I would like to offer my congratulations. And Noguchi Hideyo, all Japanese know, but maybe non-Japanese might not know Noguchi, but he was born in a very poor village of Fukushima, and he suffered burn by an accident, but that caused him to try to become a medical doctor. He was so poor, and many of you might know, but he went to the US, and his mentor was the founder of the Rockefeller Institute, was the founder, and the boss of Noguchi was the founder, top of the Rockefeller Medical Institute. Noguchi went there. And what did Noguchi do? The massive challenge back at that time was syphilis. There were many crazy persons, but the cause was because of syphilis, spiral heater, and this was proved by Noguchi. So still at Rockefeller University, of course, Rockefeller is a very well-known institute, but it was Noguchi who made Rockefeller famous in the first place. With this discovery, the importance of investment in medicine, and what caused Rockefeller to be so famous now, you might know, but I want to emphasize that it was due to Noguchi. He found out syphilis, the cause of syphilis, and he worked in so many areas. And finally, he went to Africa, he went to Latin America, and finally in Africa, he was trying to do something big, but he lost his life all of a sudden at the age of 42. And his last words, a virus was understood to exist, but Noguchi was saying that he will find it under microscope, and maybe it was not discovered yet, but he was determined that he will actually find it under the microscope, under the lens. He lost his life in Ghana. I don't understand was the last word. Likely he was not able to view it under the microscope. That is the legend, so to say. But he was determined to go to Africa. The important point is that he goes to the local community. There is the Noguchi Memorial Institute in Ghana, and I recommend that you try to visit the place if you have the opportunity. So this is a huge celebration to commend these wonderful individuals and the team. I am very happy that I can enjoy this time with you. Thank you for joining us again.
Chairperson Kurokawa, thank you very much. Next, we would like to introduce the Africa Cooperation Strategy. First, from the co-host UNDP, and Dr. Raymond Giblin, our Chief Economist, Strategy Analysis and Research from UNDP. Very sorry he's not able to be here today. We would like to show you a video message. Please refer to the screen.
Hello, my name is Raymond Gilpin, and I head the Strategy Analysis and Research team at UNDP's Regional Bureau for Africa in New York. Sincere thanks to the government and people of Japan for inviting UNDP to be part of this important symposium. The global effects of the war in Ukraine have disrupted Africa's post-COVID recovery. After exceeding expectations in 2021, with a growth rate of 4.7%, economic growth in Africa fell in 2022. This has made it difficult for countries to attain the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. The global effects of the war in Ukraine affected African economies in three important ways. First, it affected the demand for African exports and increased the costs of Africa's imports. This reduced export earnings across Africa and worsened the continent's trade balance. Second, price increases in major global economies increased the costs of African imports, particularly food and fuel. On average, domestic inflation in African countries more than doubled from 3.5% before COVID to 8.9% by mid-2022. Third, a combination of an increased need to borrowing because of weak economic performance and rising global interest rates worsened debt stress across Africa. Today, 8 African countries are in debt distress, and an additional 13 at a high risk of debt distress. Each and every day, these countries have to make a difficult decision as to whether they invest in development or use their money to service their debt. The effect of all of these factors has not only been slower growth. The quality of life and livelihoods of millions of Africans have been put in jeopardy. More specifically, poverty remains entrenched. Food insecurity is more pronounced. Green transitions are now less affordable. Tensions in society are more severe and leading to violence in some cases. And lastly, citizens have less trust in their governments. Putting African countries back on track to attain the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly in the wake of persistent global and environmental shocks, will require a new approach. UNDP's 2022 Special Report on Human Security argues for using a human security prism in the face of a new generation of interconnected threats. An African continent free from want, free from fear, and free from indignity requires a judicious interplay of protection, empowerment, and solidarity. At the core of all of this is agency, the ability to hold values and make commitments that advance our collective well-being. This renewed emphasis on human security provides a useful framework for us to articulate a future-smart, human security-focused African continent. It will require significant shift in the narrative, from GDP growth to the growth of human capital, from endemic dependency to meaningful economic sovereignty, from debilitating tensions to social cohesion, from responding to violence to investing in peace, from institutionalized exclusions to include gender, race, and religion, to inclusive growth, and from planetary stress to sustainable green transitions. I appreciate your kind attention, and we at UNDP look forward to working with you as we reimagine and re-engineer a brighter, safer, more sustainable, and more resilient future for each of Africa's 1.4 billion citizens. Please feel free to contact us for further information. Very best wishes for a productive symposium, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, from JICA, Mr. Takezawa Iko, Senior Deputy Director General, Human Resources Development at JICA. Thank you very much. Can you please show my slides? Thank you very much for allowing JICA to participate today, especially to the laureates. I would like to express my congratulations, and also to the Cabinet Office and as well as to UNDP. We are very honored to be able to co-host this symposium. And also to the audience, there are many online participants today. I would like to thank you all. And with this opportunity, we'd like to explain what JICA is doing in order to promote health in Africa, especially this is related to the achievements of the laureates as well. So medical research eradicating disease, this is what I would like to focus on today, and also universal health coverage, achieving that as well. Sorry for the very busy slide. Actually, in Japan, Africa, a strengthening foundation for biomedical research in Africa, we have been contributing this for many long years. This is something I'd like to communicate to you. One of the typical examples is here located in Ghana, Noguchi Memory Institute for Medical Research, and also in Kenya, Kenya Medical Research Institute. For both, in the 1970s, from scratch, we built the buildings and we provided research equipment, and also through technological cooperation, we have carried out human resource development as well as organizational strengthening. So not only in Africa, but this is a global medical and infectious disease research institute. Many Japanese research institutes and many Japanese universities have also cooperated concerning Ghana Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research. This is related to Dr. Noguchi. So Fukushima Prefectural University initially provided support, and they have been cooperating for a very long time. And after that, other universities, Mia University and NIH, as well as other University of Tokyo, and recently Tokyo Medical Dental University, they now have a research hub on site, and they are carrying out joint research with Noguchi Memorial Institute. And Kenya, concerning KEMRI, from the very start, Nagasaki University has played a central role, and they have continued their cooperation. Of course, for example, Kanazawa University, Shiga Medical University, many other universities are involved as well. But Nagasaki University still has a location as well there as well, and continuing joint research. And the other one is Zambia. The School of Veterinary Medicine in Zambia University, this started from scratch, the building, the research material, and also human resource development. JICA has been cooperating. And now in the School of Veterinary Medicine in Zambia University, zoonotic disease and One Health in Africa. So they are very noticeable in their efforts here. Concerning University of Zambia, Hokkaido University in Japan has been cooperating for a very long time. Hokkaido University has an office there as well, and joint research has been ongoing. And furthermore, not only that, but Nigeria CDC and Congo Inerbe. And here as well, there's been cooperation as well. The head of INRB in Congo is Dr. Mwembe, very famous for Ebola, was the laureate last year, and he has high recognition of education in Japan. What I saw in the web, There was a lecture in American University by Dr. Muembe. He said that there are various models for cooperation, but the best is JICA cooperation from Japan. He mentioned that in his speech, and I was very happy to hear that. So it was in the United States, so I don't think it was lip service, so to speak. And so JICA, together with researchers and research institutes in Japan, have been connecting them with the research institutes in Africa, and also there is Africa's CDC that is currently built, so that is a region. They will be dealing with diseases and also promotion of health as well in Africa, so we are enhancing network with them. And through these initiatives, this is very important for Japan as well, and also important for Africa, but not only that, important for the rest of the world as well. One thing I need to apologize, this diagram, I showed this to Dr. Karim, and he said that South Africa is not included. I'm very sorry for that. Until now, in terms of the cooperation between the medical institutions between Africa and Japan, it was mainly through ODA. So through funding assistance as well as technological assistance from JICA, that was the core. So from that perspective, because South Africa is very well developed, we were not able to have a strong connection. But going forward, things are changing, times are changing. Private companies and also academia will directly carry out joint research with African research institutes. So with this opportunity, those of you here today and those of you participating online, I'm sure there are many people from private companies as well as academia as well. So joint research with South Africa. Through this symposium, we hope that it will lead to such efforts going forward. Now, please look at the next slide. And this is concerning guinea worm. The contribution to the eradication of guinea worm. Guinea worm per se is not well known in Japan. So Japan has been contributing to the eradication of guinea worms in Africa. I think probably hardly anyone knows, but there's been a lot of cooperation, especially in Japan, water sanitation and surveillance, health, education. So it's multi-sector, multi-scheme type of assistance. As you can see on the left-hand side, these are related to water sanitation. To provide water to the villagers through grants. Many wells have been dug so that many people will be able to utilize safe water. So it's not only related to guinea worm, but what we are introducing here, Niger and Burkina Faso. In this, now we've been focused on guinea worms for Niger. So we supported water supply to the area where the guinea worm remained, and also for Burkina Faso, we limited the location to locations where there was a concentration of guinea worms. So we are focused on guinea worms here in Ghana. Technological assistance as well as the volunteers have gone on site to work together with the local community. So there was health education and water engineering, and many efforts have been made thus far. And also in Ghana, when we started the project, about 7,000 people. The incidents were about 7,000, but after the project has ended, not only JICA but the Carter Center and various partners also contributed. But when the project ended, the number of cases have gone down to about 500 in 2015. According to WHO, they have been officially declared guinea worm free, so it's zero. So there have been such results shown. And the Carter Center received the Noguchi Prize in terms of the guinea worm eradication project, and this is very good. So we want to say that there are many young people who in Japan as well who are dealing with the neglected diseases in Africa, in the poor countries, and also not only eradication of disease but also medical research. At JICA, we would like to achieve universal health coverage in Africa. And together with the laureates of this prize, as well as many other partners, we would like to continue our efforts in order to improve health in Africa. So we ask for your cooperation. Thank you very much. And Mr. Takeda, thank you very much. So next, we'd like to ask for a keynote address by the laureates. First, Dr. Kaisha Abdul Karim, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Excellencies, distinguished participants, friends and colleagues. It's a real honor and privilege to have this opportunity to address you as part of this JICA UNDP dialogue. It's also a huge honor and privilege for us to be the recipients of the 4th Hideyo Noguchi Award and continue the legacy of Dr. Noguchi, who was really an architect of science diplomacy some 2 centuries ago almost. And as we've been reminded with COVID, we have a shared vulnerability and an interconnectedness. And so this type of dialogue really helps in terms of finding solutions. And I want to thank the previous speakers for setting a bit of context and introducing some of the key facets of our work that is being recognized that I will continue to highlight. And I just wanted to reflect for a second on Dr. Gilpin's comments around Africa agency and the population, and you'll see how some of our work makes some contribution in that regard. Our work on HIV/AIDS it contributed to a more granular understanding of the evolving epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa. Our focus on finding prevention technologies for young women and also preventing deaths in people with HIV, TB, COVID, and lastly, our efforts in building the science base and capacity to enhance our responses to HIV and TB. So we have 10 minutes and between my co-recipient of the Medical Research Prize, we will try and elaborate a little bit, but very quickly to remind you that HIV still remains a challenge. And just to give you a glimpse, in 2021 alone, we had 38 million people living with HIV. About 2/3 have been initiated on treatment, changing the face of AIDS from one that's inevitably fatal to one that's chronic and manageable. We saw about 600,000 deaths, and that's a substantial reduction in deaths because of antiretroviral treatment, but still we see too many deaths. And lastly, we see 1.5 million new infections that took place in 2021 alone. That translates to about 4,000 infections taking place each day. 70% of those infections are in sub-Saharan Africa, where we have sexual transmission dominating, and a unique characteristic of the epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa is the age-sex difference in HIV infection acquisition, where young women between the age of 15 to 24 years have up to 7 times more infection compared to their male peers. This is a huge and a unique characteristic that really led us to be looking at important gaps. And why? Because if we look at infection in young women and we look at pregnant women in some of the highest burden districts, by age 16, 1 in 10 infected with HIV. By age 20, 1 in 3. By age 25, every other woman. And by age 30, we're looking at about 60% of women infected with HIV. You see a later rise of infection in men around age 25 to 30 years, peaking at around 35 years. And as we heard from Dr. Klipkin, that we have 1.4 billion people in Africa. About 70% of these people are under the age of 35. So when we look at HIV, this is an asset of Africa that is being eroded by HIV and so on. So what we found was, here's the problem, unique characteristic. We have to stop infections in young women. The whole world, because HIV is not just in Africa, we find it across the globe. What did we have available? Everything required male cooperation. There was absolutely nothing for women. So as scientists, that's the gap we try to fill. How do we develop technologies that will enable women to prevent themselves from getting infected? And in 2010, after 18 years of many failures, we finally demonstrated tenofovir, an antiretroviral agent used by uninfected women, could prevent HIV infection. That laid the basis for what is widely available these days in terms of what is known as pre-exposure prophylaxis. And I'm going to hand over, after a very quick comment, the most common opportunistic infection with advancing HIV disease is TB. About 70% of people who have advancing HIV disease, if untreated, will die because of the co-infection with TB. We did not know as a global community when to initiate ARV treatment. We did the studies that showed us when to initiate ARV treatment in people co-infected with HIV, TB. Today, that is policy across the globe. Wherever you are, our work contributed to advancing that particular agenda. With that, Slim will talk about COVID and other things.
Thank you very much, Kishida. Indeed, it's a great honor for us to be here in the name of Dr. Hideyo Noguchi. When we look at all of his accomplishments, when we look at his work in the laboratory with microscopes, when we look at his work in the field, he epitomized the power of science, the power of public health to change the lives of people. We have, in the course of almost 35 years of research on HIV, we've tried to emulate that. We have undertaken research in the laboratory, we have undertaken research in clinical research and clinical trials, and we have focused on public health. Nowhere has that been more clear than in the COVID-19 pandemic. Because we spent more than 2 decades building the capacity to respond to the HIV pandemic, when COVID came along, we were ready. We were ready because we had the capacity. We had the epidemiologists, we had the surveillance systems, we had the phylogenetic capacity, and that's one of the reasons why we've been able as a country to discover new variants. And most notably, you'll know that the Omicron variant was first described from South Africa. And why was that the capacity? Why is it that we could do that? Within 4 days of us describing the first cases of Omicron, we were already able to put together the data that enabled the world to understand the epidemiology of this virus, the way that this virus is growing at a rapid pace, far faster than every other SARS-CoV-2 variant we'd seen up to then. We showed to the world how to deal with this virus, how best to deal with this virus in terms of its rapid growth, but also its lower clinical disease, its lower severity. And that's just an example of how we are a global community. That within a matter of a week, from the time we first reported Omicron, within a week, it was already in 30 countries around the world. Within 3 weeks, it was in over 100 countries. So we are all interconnected. And the way in which we are doing research in Africa is part and parcel of us attempting to deal with this in the world overall. I want to just leave you on the note that in the course of the last few days that we have been here in Japan, it has been an eye-opening experience. We have met senior politicians, we have met Prime Minister, we've met the Emperor and Empress yesterday, we have met your scientists, we've been to medical schools, we've been to the UN University, we've been to Nippon Medical School, we've given lectures, we have been totally impressed with the quality of the research, the quality of science. And all I can say is that I hope that the work that we are doing in Africa will in some way make a contribution in the way that you have been building your capacity and undertaking this high quality research. We can only hope to emulate your good work. Thank you very much.
Dr. Courage, Dr. Salim, thank you very much. Next, from the Carter Center, Mr. Adam Weiss and Ms. Megan Matz. First, Megan, please.
Distinguished guests, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My colleague Adam Weiss and I will be discussing the guinea worm eradication program, which won the Noguchi Prize for Medical Services in Africa. The Carter Center was founded in 1982 by former US President Jimmy Carter and former First Lady Rosalind Carter. And our efforts are divided into two areas, peace and health. We emphasize action and measurable results. We do not duplicate the effective efforts of others, and we address difficult problems in difficult situations, and we recognize the possibility of failure as an acceptable risk. My colleagues at the Carter Center have helped improve the lives of people in more than 80 countries by preventing conflicts, enhancing freedom, and improving health. While we're headquartered in Atlanta, the majority of our staff are located abroad. Our peace programs work to deepen democracy by nurturing full citizen participation in public policymaking and by helping bolster the rule of law, fair administration of justice, access to information, and government transparency. We also believe that people can improve their lives when provided with the necessary skills, knowledge, and access to resources. And this is a central tenet of our health programs as well. We advise, facilitate, and train, but ultimately it's the country's program. Program staff are country nationals, and their staff of the local health authorities or other partners. We focus on neglected tropical diseases, public health training, and something I like to refer to as a neglected global disease, mental health. And now my colleague Adam Weiss, Director of the Guinea Worm Eradication Program, will share more with you about the program that won the Hideyo Noguchi Africa Prize for Medical Services. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Megan. Dr. Kurokawa eloquently introduced guinea worm, but let me share some of the history and the how. The program first started in 1980 at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, following the successful eradication of smallpox. And it set the ambitious goal of trying to eradicate the second human disease and the first parasite. The disease was targeted for eradication because it was primarily in human hosts, was geographically limited to 21 countries, and was transmitted seasonally, and was also known to be preventable through behavior change. Doctors Bill Foege and Donald Hopkins successfully lobbied President Carter, and the Carter Center agreed to take on the global challenge of eradicating guinea worm disease. There was no cure for the disease, no vaccine or therapeutic. And in Africa, it was known as the disease of the empty granary. The Carter Center worked hand in hand with the World Health Organization, who in 1986 passed a resolution calling for the formal eradication of guinea worm. In 1986, there were 3.5 million people with guinea worm disease annually. And by the end of 2022, there were just 13 people. Imagine how incredible that is on a planet of nearly 8 billion people. The interventions to stop guinea worm are an important part of the history because they tell us how did we get to just 13. From distributing pipe filters like the one I'm holding here, or distributing cloth filters that enable people to sieve and filter their water to be free from the disease, establishing community-based surveillance so that volunteers at the community level, residents of the endemic villages, are responsible for reporting and detecting the disease. The provision of safe water, something that JICA helped with in Ghana, supported the acceleration of guinea worm eradication. Empowering and equipping volunteers to conduct peer-to-peer health education, because outsiders trying to influence local communities without having the trust, without having the local knowledge, is fraught with challenge. The Carter Center's approach in working with a global coalition has been about listening first and foremost to the communities, understanding the needs, understanding how programs can work effectively, oftentimes bridging the gap between their own governments and their population, building partnership at the community level with local leaders, building partnership with the ministries of health, building partnership with research universities, with donors to help contribute to the program. That collaboration is really built into the DNA of the Carter Center and the Global Guinea Worm Eradication Program. Given the challenges that are faced by the national programs, we've innovated to develop new interventions, such as proactive tethering of domestic animals that might also transmit the disease. By building on what President Carter sought out to do after he was president, to help wage peace. Working in endemic countries to ensure that communities are also more resilient in the face of insecurity, and at the same time, pairing it with health services, because without peace, you cannot have health, and without health, you cannot have peace. Eradicating a disease is a noble ambition, and it's not an easy one. So we're always adapting to local needs and listening and learning from the insights that fellow researchers, that community members have to offer. The Guinea Worm Program has helped to increase access to education, strengthened health systems by bridging the gap between communities and health facilities. And despite the challenges that the global campaign faces in this last most difficult mile, with just 13, you'd think by tomorrow we would be done, but it is more complicated than that. We know that the science is behind us, but we also know that the fight against guinea worm is even more than just getting to zero. It's even more than the ambitious goal of eradication. It's even more than preventing pain and suffering. It's really about empowering people and building hope. I'm personally humbled by volunteers like you see here, Regina. She motivated her own community through song and dance to encourage and model behaviors that would put an end to guinea worm. There is no guinea worm left in her village, but also encouraging and mobilizing their community to fight other diseases. They are the ones that represent the Hideyo Noguchi Prize and the meaning behind the Hideyo Noguchi Prize. They are the ones that are building resilience at the community level. Before I close, I would like to play a short video that helps to contextualize what the Global Guinea Worm Eradication Program has really looked and felt like. And it's done through spoken word and storytelling, which is what I think reflects Africa and how they communicate. So if I could please ask for assistance to play the video.
Oh my, how far today we've come. Through war, through gore, through all that's glum. Through the crippling chorus of the doubters' drums that banged on loud that it can't be done. 3,500,000 was the starting sum, whilst endless and traceless cases overrun. Neglected, the infected had no one. See, much bigger battles had to first be won. So its reign of terror raged, this fiery serpent from an ancient age, inflicting pain with disdain it waged. Its war poured on the poor it played. It cared not for gender, age, or creed. At the water holes it poured its seed and sprung. Its trap and when thirst ushered those in need. Again, the cycle of woe begun. It ravaged and bore through limbs and dreams, through the farmless farms that yielded none, through the strained regimes, through poverty's schemes, through the children's screams, even the soldiers' guns. Meanwhile, on shores a world away, the president's men lend themselves a feat to slay the serpent, come what may. So they built a team to complete the deed. The task seems simple: make the waters clean, educate, engage, channel change through song, give the masses classes, no need for vaccines, just some local warriors with a will that's strong. And as the cause rang true, more joined the fray. Donors to fund the fight, partners with roles to play, doctors to bring relief, leaders to lead the way, experts with expertise, the tables turned that day. Together fight disease, together wage some peace, together inspire hope, together bring reprieve, together cure this ill, slay this parasite beast. Hand in hand, together we achieve. It's been 40 years, all of them toil part done. A pipe dream at first facing 3 million ones. Now it's just 13 cases, just 13. Thanks to warriors with filter pipes rebuilding dreams. Now it's just 13, I mean it's just 13. 12. It's just 13.
You don't go from 3.5 million people a year with the disease to 13 without working together. The leadership of the World Health Organization, UNICEF, support from JICA to provide safe water, and volunteers, ministries of health and their staff and community members working together. That's how you get to just 13. Thank you very much.
アダム・ウェイス様、メガン・マーツ様、ありがとうございました。
Mr. Adam Weiss and Ms. Megan Martz, thank you very much. Now we'd like to move on to the panel discussion. We would like to set the stage. And during that time, we'd like to ask the panelists to go up to the stage. Moderator will be Mr. Takujawa from JICA. Doctors Abdul Karim, Mr. Adam Weiss, Ms. Megan Martz, please come to the stage. And former JICA Overseas Corporation volunteer in related to Guinea worm project and currently is in Japan, active as OBGYN. Dr. Fujita, you please come to the stage. The panel discussion will be for about 15 minutes. Initially, there will be Q&A. So if you have any questions, do please raise your hand at the timing. And those of you online, please use the Q&A function. Please input your question there. We like to respond as much as time allows. So, Mr. Takizawa, please. Thank you very much for allowing me to moderate such a wonderful panel. I'm very honored. So first, from here, Dr. Fujita is going to be joining. So I'd like to ask a question. Dr. Fujita, I think your background is very rare. You are a JICA volunteer, Togo. So, no, Niger, sorry. In Niger, concerning Guinea worm eradication program, you're involved in that. And then for some time you were doing other development works and you decided to become a doctor. So currently she is OBGYN. I think her background is quite rare. As was introduced in the video. So Dr. Fujita, from your experience, Guinea worm, actually, so can you share with us what you experienced on site? Thank you. You have some slides as well?
Thank you for the introduction. I'm Fujita, obstetrician gynecologist. More than 20 years ago, as a Japan Overseas Corporation volunteer, I was dispatched to Niger. Back then, I encountered guinea worm pain. In the rural areas, back when I was there, it was really endemic, more painful than labor. I was not a medical doctor. I was not an obstetrician and gynecologist. I was preparing IT education material, and I observed this disease in rural areas. And I was shocked, and it was an exciting opportunity. I mean, I shouldn't say exciting. It was a hard time, but through this experience of the volunteer, I became aware and I decided to become a medical doctor. It was 900 kilometers away from the capital, and just a few kilometers from the capital, there is no gas, no water, no electricity. In such a place, I was a volunteer, and the real Africa I thought I had observed. So I was excited, I was very impressed, but the guinea worm, it was Niger had so many thousands of cases. When I went to villages, there were so many guinea worm patients, and the life in that place, it's so hard. No water, no running water. They drink pond water, and that's where there's guinea worm. I brought this. You can touch this. Come and touch this later, please. So this is what I collected on the field. There's only 13 available like this. Have you enjoyed pasta at lunch? You might not be very interested, but come forward and please come and touch this. But guinea worm becomes large inside the body. It's like 1 meter by 1 year, and then it prolapses the skin, and that's when it is the most painful. But it was really hard work for us. I mean, because of the pain, the patients are so violent and they can't walk. And when they are painful, it's a rainy season and people have to be on the farm. But they can't work on the farm means that economic activities will be suspended. They cannot create the crops that they eat. The economic damage is huge. So it's the most poorest community and the most rural, most remote, most poorest. It's the barometer of poverty if guinea worm is endemic. They can't work because of the pain. They can't go to the farm. It's so debilitating. But where guinea worm is endemic, it's the loser community, loser population, those who have lost, the poorest of the poorest. It's a stigma. If this disease is eradicated, hopefully, I thought the life could be better. So in these places, fetching water is so hard. Children, they spend hours and hours just to fetch water. In this kind of place, the government of Japan has tried to provide clean water by pump or by extraction of deep wells. The government has done quite a lot. Right hand side below, this is the pipe. They carry this pipe, this on the farm, they carry this pipe so that whenever they access water, guinea worm is a parasite of copepod. So by drinking through a filter, the water flea, the guinea worm infection can be prevented. It's a dirty water anyway. It's not clean. The left-hand side below, it's a neonate, but this is the dirty water that they have to use to clean the baby. I really thought I have seen a real Africa. So this is a filter. The government of Japan has prepared this hundreds of thousands of this is distributed to endemic countries. In the villages, we try to tell them that you can use them as a sieve, that the water should become safe. But after 1 week, it becomes like this holes and becoming brown and dirty and not easy to maintain. And the access road, terrible. A Toyota, Land Cruiser Toyota, even such Toyota would find it difficult, dirt road, and you meet giraffes. This is in Niger. But during the rainy season, this is what happens, just mud, mud, mud. And you get stuck completely. This is what happens always in summer. Cars get stuck, and our Toyota Land Cruiser, Carter Center cars all get stuck in this way. And it's dark, you continue to work on the car to pull them out of the mud, and so many nights spent in this way. Again, this is in Niger in the rainy season. Drivers say that they can go and they get stuck anyway. So drivers are brave, but they get stuck. And we have gone through this for hours and hours and nights and nights. And my fond memory, the American people, Japanese people, and the local people are getting together for events. So it's a eradication week for guinea worm. It's a event week for the eradication, and we try to visit the villages, try to teach how to use the filters. We try to advocate what this parasite is, how we might be able to prevent or eradicate. Health education is conducted mobile across villages, and the common language is the local language. American, Japanese, and the local people, when we communicate, it's a local language that we use to communicate. This was really, I mean, it's difficult, a scorching sun, but still, it was so fun and memorable, very fond memories. And the American people, they are very fluent in the language, and the Peace Corps people, wherever it is, they live in the most remotest areas. So we have learned a great deal from those American volunteers. We have learned how to survive in the remotest of the remotest. Very fond memories. The right-hand side above, Dr. Hopkins at the Carter Center, a very important person. So in this way, we made a uniform for ourselves. And my experience, this I think is such a rare opportunity. I have learned about survival and life through my experience at Carter Center. Now I returned to Japan. I have become a medical doctor, and I want to go back to Africa. I am very happy that I have had this experience by the Carter Center. I went too long. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you were able to express what happened on site, and your personal impact was large. That was very clear. So next, I'd like to ask you, Adam, Fujita-san just mentioned about what happened on site concerning guinea worm. So in your presentation concerning guinea worm, you said that there are more than 3 million per year, has now gone down to only 13. So the number has come down. Even if you look at the example of polio, to eradicate a disease, what is very important is the very last part, I think. So concerning guinea worm eradication program, currently, what are the difficulties that you're facing, and how are you thinking of overcoming these challenges?
Thank you so much. You're absolutely right. The end of an eradication campaign is generally the most difficult part. The first few years with any kind of intervention, you will affect some level of change, regardless of the level of rigor that you apply to those interventions. But your attention to detail towards the end is of the utmost importance. And we're seeing that in polio eradication and guinea worm eradication. In addition, you deal with some challenges that you might not have known about when you first sought out eradication. Just as polio, in identifying multiple strains, and how do you develop vaccines to account for those? In guinea worm, the primary challenge that we've faced as we've gone into the end game or the last mile of eradication is with the increased infections in domestic dogs and cats. We knew it was always possible for them to become infected, but we didn't know that they could in turn drive transmission. And so it really forced the global program to rethink the strategy, to a certain extent, rethink the approach, and ensuring that we take a more One Health initiative as opposed to looking at it from a human health only perspective. And I think that was helpful in ensuring that we're also making better investments into the future, not only again to eliminate a specific disease, but to make sure that our investments in health system strengthening are also more holistic in their approach. Even in smallpox, towards the end, there were reports of monkeypox and a question of, was smallpox really gone? And so with guinea worm, making sure we have the tools available to validate zero infection is also important. And so we've had to increase investments in the development of diagnostics that we hope can be available very soon, both for ensuring we're detecting all of the infections, but also moving into the future to again make sure that we don't incorrectly confirm the absence of infection. And I think we're also facing the challenge, like many public health programs, where you suffer the consequences of success. In that there are so few human cases, it's easy for the world to turn its back. Not necessarily because they don't care, but because we assume the infections will go away. It's only 13, so tomorrow there should be none. But we forget that it still requires strong engagement, both at the community level, at the national level, and at the international level, to make sure that we finish the job so that we get those benefits in perpetuity forever, instead of continuing a long battle with low numbers of infection that again could cause outbreaks to harm human health and animal health.
Thank you very much for your comments. So concerning guinea worm, so zoonotic disease, that is a factor as well concerning polio as well. With vaccine, we thought that it can be prevented. However, there were vaccine-derived polio issues that arose as well. So science is important all the time. And so now I'd like to ask Dr. Koresha about science. So Dr. Koresha, and Dr. Salim as well, together with him, you've been in South Africa carrying out medical research. You've been leading that, and now you're leading the world in that effort. And recently, in terms of medical research, especially the global north and global south, there seems to be a joint research, and in that time, decolonization is a word that is often cited, meaning that the global north researchers will be not controlling all the money and the research, but to provide ownership to the global south researchers as well. And that is also an important point. So as global south researcher, I'm sure there's been a lot of difficulties that you have had to overcome. So from your past experience, so in terms of as a global south researcher, uh, what kind of research, what is the background, if you can share? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just like a quick reminder, in 1990, South Africa was still an apartheid state. And here was an emerging and evolving epidemic impacting the majority of the population. And we were, part of sanctions against South Africa. So in that context, we are looking at a problem impacting the communities we live in and surrounded by, and almost isolated as well. One, describing the problem, two, then finding that the root cause of the problem is about gender power differences, and then trying to develop a technology. In many parts of Africa, we used to waiting for technology to arrive, and then we use and adopt it. And here we were, because nowhere else in the world at that point, people were thinking about this gap for women. And how do we now try to do this? And we reached out, of course, very rapidly as the epidemic was growing exponentially. Sanctions were lifted after the banning of the extra parliamentary parties, and we're trying to negotiate towards democracy. So on the brink of democracy, as we're becoming part of the global community, we're also having to grapple with this HIV epidemic. And we've been fortunate in having grants from the US government, from the European Union, and these have helped both with building capacity, with to do the research, with partnerships and collaborations. And ultimately, we did what we set out to do was solve local problems, the deaths and prevention. And it's in that process, what we've learned is that the world benefited, because HIV is not just in Africa. We may have diversity in modes of transmission, in the magnitude of the problem between and within countries, but what is common is HIV is found across the globe. So when we found PrEP, we were able to now make it part of the solution. And also the research, the technological solution is only step one. The real benefit is, how do you get something that works to the people who will benefit most? And that's something that one teaches us about the new questions we need to ask in research, but also enables us to facilitate policy and programming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next, Dr. Salim, I'd like to ask you a question as well. In Africa, medical research, so the future of medical research in Africa, Dr. Salim, so you have been leading medical research in Africa, and you're contributing to the entire world now. But going forward, Africa's medical research, how do you think it should be going forward, if you can share with us? And within that, then Japan, how can Japan, together with South Africa and African researchers, how can we also contribute together, if you can mention that, please? And then this Noguchi Prize, what is the implication? If you can also mention that within your comments, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I think I'd like to touch on 3 issues in responding to your question. Today's world is a very different one from 20 years ago, in one quite important respect, in that Africa and African scientists, African governments are no longer standing with a begging bowl. This is no longer a question of how can the countries in the north come and solve the problems of the south. This is an era where countries in the south are looking for support to enable them to address their own problems. And you see it in very different strategies. For example, if you take the US government's US aid, their basic approach is to fund US institutions to come and do the work in Africa. And so essentially they're round tripping the money. The money is actually going to Americans principally, and only a fraction to the Africans. If you take the European Union's biggest medical research program called EDCTP, that is a fundamentally different approach where African countries take the initiative. They put together the programs, and the bulk of the funding goes to the African researchers in the African countries, not to the European partners. So you're looking at two very different models. And basically, the world is moving towards the second model, the one where, in the instance of JICA, you've got your Prepare program, where you are helping African countries, and the 5 African countries in particular you've got in the network, you're helping them come up so that they can address their own problems. And I think that that's the way of the future. And I think that that is what when we refer to overseas development aid, we actually no longer referring to a colonial strategy, but one that breaks the colonial barriers and empowers countries to deal with their own problems. And the reason why that's central is because that builds capacity, that builds human capacity, infrastructure, medical care, laboratories, whatever it is, it's building that capacity so that whatever the next challenge is that comes along, that countries are capacitated to deal with those problems. And I think in medical research, I have seen very different ways in which we have dealt with different organizations across the world, and we partner with many of them. And increasingly, there's a very clear recognition that this kind of imbalance in relationships, where Africa is the poor, disadvantaged partner, and the developed world is the advantaged partner, we are now trying to change that scale and make it a more equal scale of partnerships of equals, partnerships that respect each other. And in answering that last part of your question, to me, Dr. Noguchi was not about an agenda. His entire world and what he sought to do was to be there in Africa to help Africans address the African challenges of yellow fever. And to me, that epitomizes the kind of things we would like to see being done to a greater extent with our receiving the Hideyo Noguchi Award, is about engaging and building capacity, training the next generation of scientists so that they will continue the work we have started, that they will become even greater scientists, and they'll do so not alone. They'll do so in partnership with colleagues in Japan, in Europe, across the world. Thank
you. Thank you very much. We hope that we'll be able to meet your expectation as equal partners. So now going back to the Carter Center, Megan, please. And the Carter Center has Peace Program, and also you have Global Health Program. And it's trying to deliver activities that really need the help in the world. So from your perspective, and Japan's assistance, Japan's aid, is it really being delivered to people who really need it? Your comments can be critical. We'd be interested in hearing your views. And also, assistance from Japan so that it can be delivered to people who really need it. To make that possible, if you have any advice, that would also be appreciated.
Thank you very much. So for the Carter Center, I can speak to specifically. Japan is one of our oldest donors with us from almost the very beginning. And for the Guinea worm eradication program, Japan is one of our top 5 donors as well. And when we're talking about neglected tropical diseases, these are by definition programs that are for the most vulnerable and in the most difficult areas to access. And with the support and the partnerships that we have, we are reaching them by building capacity through local ministries of health and working with local staff. And that's beyond the Guinea worm eradication program, as you've heard as well. We've distributed over 800 million doses of medicine for 5 neglected tropical diseases in 14 countries in both Africa and Latin America. We've assisted with construction of over 3.6 million latrines to combat blinding trachoma. We've delivered health education in tens of thousands of communities. And with the Carter Center's resources and support, 4 countries in Latin America have eliminated onchocerciasis with our assistance. But to answer your question, how can Japan do more? I'm reminded of something that President Carter says, and he says that his faith demands that he do whatever he can, wherever he can, whenever he can, for as long as he can, with whatever he has, to try to make a difference. And I think that regardless of our faith, developed countries have resources. And for that, we have a moral obligation. This week, we've had a lot of wonderful conversations as we've toured around Tokyo and surrounding areas talking about the Noguchi Prize. We've had conversations with the Japanese government, with companies, with people, with agencies like JICA. And I think some investments that we've talked about that Japan can increase, these would include partnering with organizations to promote health systems strengthening, partnering with local ministries of health to do that, promoting surveillance systems, safe water. These are all things that Japan has expertise in and the ability to promote. Workforce development, and that is going to really lead to more sustainable programs in the long run. We need these coordinated investments between Japan, between organizations, and between ministries of health in the countries where we work. We need it to be coordinated. But most importantly, we need to make sure that the communities where these programs are going to be taking place, we need to make sure that they are listened to so that their ownership is not an afterthought. If we want sustainable health systems, and if we want this to be done right, they have to be leading this. They have to be listened to.
Thank you very much. JICA would like to use the wonderful words of former President Carter as well. So I think we have time for Q&A as well, but before that, lastly to Dr. Fujita, to Japanese young people, maybe they want to be involved in promoting health in Africa. So if you can give a few words, please.
I really encourage the younger generation to visit Africa. It's exactly the opposite from Japan. All people are young in Africa. So for the younger generation to be active, whatever the channel, whatever the opportunity, whatever the employment, you will be excited in working in Africa. I strongly encourage the Japan Overseas Cooperative Volunteer or the Peace Corps. Those who have been to Africa, they always want to go back. It's a place to live. I really hope that you will go to Africa. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I hope they'll be active. I do hope that they'll participate. So now we would like to entertain questions. First, from the floor. If anyone has a question or comment, or if you want to share your experience, please raise your hand. Yes, please. You're welcome to speak either in Japanese or English. Thank you very much. I am a journalist. My name is Sakamoto from the Asahi Shimbun newspaper. I would like to ask a question to Drs. Karim. Dr. Kurokawa said earlier concerning HIV/AIDS, the society as well as the governments did not provide sufficient understanding, but still you continue to research. So within such circumstance, what kind of difficulties did you face and how did you overcome them? If you can share with us, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
That's a very complicated question with a very long answer. I'll give you a short version. I can tell you that there are not many countries where a scientist is on the front page of the newspaper attacking and challenging the president of the country, and where that person is still going to be living the next weekend. During the presidency under President Mbeki, where he promoted the idea that HIV does not cause AIDS, I was regularly in the newspapers, regularly in the media, challenging him on that notion. I had to. I was the head of AIDS research in my country. It falls on me as the head of AIDS research in the Medical Research Council to take on that responsibility. And I didn't do it alone. There were many others who also took up this challenge. Throughout challenging the president, we always did so in a cordial way. But I was never, ever scared that anything untoward would ever happen to me. Because I think South Africa, its constitution, its belief in free speech, its belief that the citizens can differ with government is entrenched. It's entrenched because we come from a period of repression. And the new government, the democratic government, was not going to repeat that repression. And so free speech was an essential part. At the end of quite a difficult journey, for me personally, and for many of us who took on the government, who wanted to ensure that we were going to do the right thing. Eventually, when the president relented and allowed us in 2004 to introduce antiretroviral therapy, it was done in a way where he had no choice. And the reason he had no choice was that groups like ourselves were already receiving antiretroviral drugs and funding for antiretroviral treatment, and were already providing it to people, even though it was against government policy. That we were quite openly going to defy government policy because saving lives was more important. In fact, when we opened the first clinic to provide AIDS treatment in our rural clinic, the patients were coming in wheelbarrows. They were being pushed in wheelbarrows. They were at death's door. A month later, they were walking to the clinic to get their next dose of medication. That's how quickly they were recovering. For us, it changed our worldview, and it made us even stronger. And it gave us the evidence to show the world and to show our country that AIDS treatment truly saves lives. And I think it was through that we were able to use evidence, we were able to use our experience to show that we were making a difference, I believe led to eventually a change in policy and the introduction of antiretroviral therapy. Today, South Africa is the country with the largest antiretroviral program in the world. We have over 5 million people on antiretroviral therapy. We have taken mother-to-child transmission to such a low point, we only have a handful of cases left, and we are heading towards elimination. So that is a reflection of activists, community, researchers, all of us coming together and standing together to say that what is right is right. And that's what must be done.
If I may just add 2 quick points. The judiciary played a very important role. So when we are able through randomized controlled trials generate the evidence, we were able to present technical evidence to the courts, who then pronounced that government should make interventions for mother-to-child transmission, subsequently antiretroviral treatment. There was also an issue around drug pricing that the courts ruled on that enabled parallel importation to make drugs affordable. And I think those are important lessons as we do pandemic preparedness. And then the complementary bit is the global solidarity, and particularly the role of Japan and other countries in the establishment of the Global Fund for AIDS, TB, and Malaria, and the US Presidential Emergency Program for AIDS Relief were two instruments that were so important for enabling access at a time when most of the industrialized countries had changed AIDS from one that was inevitably fatal, chronic and manageable. Only 55,000 people in Africa in 2004 had access to ARVs, and these were mainly wealthy people who could afford it. And today, when you look at the numbers, nearly 30 million on ARV treatment, it speaks to the importance of global solidarity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the floor?
Yeah, thank you very much for today's discussion. I really surprised a lot of information. This is Makoto from NEC Corporation. This is a Japanese ICT company. I'm currently doing a project in Ghana for the partner is the UNDP, doing the project of the digital health to provide a digital tool to improve of the malnutrition and anemia of the malaria. So back to the, I want to ask you about the Dr. Salim or the Dr. Karaisha. You talking about the HIV and TB. Then you also highlight of the technology. So I want to know about what did you face in the challenges then is in technology the company can provide to solve the issues. So I just want to ask you about those points. Thank you.
I'll just respond and deal with just 2 points. The first is that we understand the need for us in dealing with any new disease to focus on the 3 key countermeasures: diagnostics, vaccines, therapeutics. There is no way any one country is going to make all of it. I mean, except perhaps the US and maybe some countries in Europe. The other countries don't have technology that cuts across, so we have to partner. For example, when we reported Omicron, within 4 hours of that announcement, we received several emails asking us for the sequence, asking us for samples, but not one was from Japan. Now, why is that the case? We should be sending those kinds of information to Japan to work with the Japanese companies to make diagnostics, to make new vaccines based on that sequence. That's the thing that I'm hoping our visit is changing, that we should not only be sharing that information with, as we did, we sent it to Kenya, we sent it to France, we sent it to the US, to Canada. We should be sending it to Japan just as much. So I think that partnership is going to be essential. But the second part for me is a big challenge. And I was asked recently to speak, give the keynote address at a meeting between the WTO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, the WHO, because intellectual property is a huge obstacle. The reason we can't make mRNA vaccines in South Africa, even though we have a WHO hub to make mRNA, is because we don't have access to the intellectual property. And that has to be solved. There has to be a way in which the WTO invokes the principles of the TRIPS that allows in emergency and pandemic situations to bypass intellectual property protections, because otherwise you end up with a situation where countries are profiteering on the back of a pandemic. And I believe that has to change. We were really shocked that when we set up the hub funded by the WHO, that both Moderna and BioNTech, that have the intellectual property to make mRNA, both refuse to share anything with us. They refuse to share know-how. They refuse to share intellectual property completely. Instead, their approach is, we are going to put our company in your country to make our vaccines in your country. We won't share with you. In other words, we won't empower you. We will colonize you. That, for me, is not a way in which we move forward, especially not if we want to be ready to deal with the next pandemic.
We do have to work with each other with trust and honesty. And, you know, J&J was manufacturing vaccines in South Africa, different type of vaccine, and they asked for permission to export. And the argument was that it's being manufactured in South Africa, it's to export it to other countries in Africa. And then it turned out, because this story broke on in the New York Times, that the first 90,000 doses that were, 30 million doses that were made were actually shipped off to Europe. Now, you know, that's the type of dishonesty we absolutely can't work. And then the other quick point I wanted to make is that if we want to prepare for pandemics, the first thing we have to do is prevent outbreaks. And I think this is where the digital technology and smart devices that we have can start to prevent outbreaks from becoming epidemics and epidemics becoming pandemics. No guarantee, but at least we can have better containment.
Thank you very much. There's one question from one of our online participants. This is also to Doctors Karim. In Africa, HIV epidemiological characteristics, what is it? Is it different from other regions? And then what would be the effective measures if there are differences?
The epidemiology of HIV is quite different across the world. If you look at a country like Russia, the epidemiology of HIV is that it's pretty much restricted to two key groups: injecting drug users and gay men. They have a very small epidemic in women. If you come to Africa, our epidemic is largely in Southern Africa. As you know, Southern Africa alone accounts for about 50% of the global pandemic of HIV. Africa as a whole, the whole of Africa accounts for 70%. In other words, 2 out of every 3 HIV infections is in Africa. The principal driving force behind the epidemic in Africa is high rates of HIV in young women. So that's not the case in most other countries. If you go to Europe, it's not the case. If you go to China, it's not the case. If you go to the US, it's not the case. There are different risk groups in those countries. So Africa is somewhat different in that we've got this challenge of young women with very high rates of infection. When we did our first study of it, it was 4 times higher in young women than in men. So this age difference is what drives the problem. So if young girls and young boys are having sex, they will pretty much saturate and the epidemic will burn itself out. But when you have older men and younger women, then you keep having younger women coming into the population, and so they keep getting infected, and that's what's driving the high rates. And we describe this as the cycle of HIV transmission. Young women, high rates of infection. When they get to their 30s, they have a lot of infection, up to 60%. They pass it on to the men in their 30s. Those men are having sex with young girls. They pass it on to the young girls, and then you continue the cycle. So the epidemiology is distinctly different that we have to deal with in Africa, which means we need different technologies. And that's one of the big challenges, and that's why our research is so different from the rest of the world in HIV. We are focusing on technologies that empower women, that put some kind of protection in the hands of women, And that has been something we have spent over, well, almost 30 years working on. But it took 18 years of failure before we achieved success. So we have to be ready to understand that finding solutions is not something that happens overnight. You have to be willing to go the long road that it takes with multiple failures before you can achieve success.
Yeah, thank you very much. We do want to hear much more, but in the interest of time, I see Dr. Mihara on the floor. Would you like to give a message to the laureates? Sorry to ask you all of a sudden. So he is a primary supporter as a parliamentary member in Japan. Dr. Karim and Adam Weiss and Ms. Martz, actually I'm very impressed because about 30 years ago I went to Niger and about 20 years ago Niger as well. And I'm not sure if you know Dr. Fujita. Niger in Tesa, about 1,000 kilometers away, there is Tanizaki Yuso, and he said that Japan's right there is here, even in this kind of remote area. I was very impressed. But someone like you became a doctor afterwards to treat people and to try to save people who got sick. It's such a noble motivation. I didn't have that, but in any case, in Japan as well, a year and a half ago, I resigned from politics, but in Japan, there are neglected tropical diseases, NTDs, concerning that. Finally, in politics, people are trying to face that. AIDS, TB, malaria, not only those. So from that perspective, Dr. Karim, gradually in Japan, we are trying to work together with you, the 80 million people. We hope that under universal health coverage that everyone can live. So now we have come to realize that. I just wanted to report that to you. And Dr. Fujita, your courage. I was very impressed. I was very moved. Thank you very much. Thank you for summarizing that up. So with this, we'd like to end today's panel. From the laureates, if you would like to say one last word to the audience and to online participants as well, please.
One question, Carter Center that changed my life. About the future activities, do you have any plans? Adam, if you can just tell me one word like about the future activities.
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. The Carter Center works on many different diseases in addition to guinea worm. Of course, we didn't talk a lot about those today, but several of them are eye-blinding diseases, trachoma, onchocerciasis, Megan had mentioned earlier. We also work on mental health training, behavior change, and even combining forces between NTD programs and mental health, as many neglected tropical diseases cause stigma, cause ostracization socially, economically. So making sure that we're meeting the needs of the whole person as much as we're also trying to meet the needs of the whole community. So we're not necessarily looking for the next or new disease. We do work on many diseases already, but really making sure that the programs are very intentional in strengthening existing health systems and or building and developing them where they don't already exist. And perhaps if I may just enter, what I would share to all those that have participated today online and here in this room is to encourage Dr. Fujita's pathway, again, whether that's through JICA or through any other structure. As societies, if we are only in it for ourselves, we are going to collapse. So we have to think about each other, and the best way to do that is to force us outside of our comfort zone, whether that's traveling abroad or living within a different ethnic group, working with immigrants, working with internally displaced populations, to really force ourselves to think about what life is like when you don't have all the resources. I lived in Africa for 10 years. It made it very clear to me what life is like without safe water, without electricity, without cell phones. And when you can survive in that type of environment, then think about all the things you can do when you have resources, creating the equity that the Kareems were talking about, making sure that we're actually developing from within as opposed to, oh, I'm helping you, I'm doing this for you. We can do it together because we all benefit from that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, so with this, we'd like to close the panel discussion. Thank you all very much. Warm round of applause to the panelists, please. Thank you very much to the panelists. Please go back to your seats. So now we are nearing the close. Lastly, from the 7th Director of the UNU, Under Secretary General of the UN, Professor Gigi Marwala, please. The microphone will be brought to you.
Konnichiwa. The American poet Walt Whitman once argued that the nation's development and sustainability are more dependent on the abilities and character of its people than on its natural resources and size of its economy. Today, I am proud to congratulate, firstly, my fellow South Africans, Dr. Kwarisha Abdul Karim and Dr. Salim Abdul Karim, as well as the Guinea worm eradication program, because they have been awarded for the decades of the work that has focused on improving the abilities, character, and health of Africans and people everywhere. Their foundational research, leadership, and unwavering commitment to training scientists have elevated Africa's competence in meeting its health needs and overcoming health crises. Their scientific achievements have improved and saved countless of lives in Africa and beyond. Laudably, Dr. Slim and Dr. Karisha's work directly confronted the stigmas and denial of AIDS by blending rigorous research with a focus on understanding the people and communities affected by AIDS and tuberculosis. They simultaneously broke through scientific and social barriers to prevention and treatment. Significantly, it is their human-centered research that spotlighted the gender dimensions of HIV and its inordinate burden on women. That work extended to vital advocacy for women in science and efforts to improve education and training for scientists in South Africa. After years of groundbreaking contributions to epidemiology, vaccine development, and scientific training and leadership, Dr. Slim and Dr. Karisha continue to help meet the challenges of COVID-19 pandemic. Their lifelong research has reverberated throughout the global response to COVID-19, enabling coordinated epidemiological response, guiding government actions, and supporting vaccine development and distribution. Many people in South Africa and globally became familiar with the Karims during the COVID-19 pandemic, where Dr. Salim Abdul Karim served as the leader of the South African Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19 and the African the Task Force for Coronavirus. Yet again, their work has equipped people to meet their full potential. I was in South Africa during the pandemic, and indeed, Salim was almost like a movie star who used to appear in the evenings, 7 o'clock, to tell us about the statistics and what we need to do to protect our people. If we move forward with the thesis, Africa's potential lies in its people, then we have to listen very carefully to the Karims. More than 60% of Africa's population is under the age of 25. By 2030, young Africans are expected to constitute 42% of global youth. Yet we are demonstrably not tapping into this potential. According to the African Development Bank, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, 1/3 of Africa's population between 15 and 35 years old were unemployed. Another third were vulnerably employed, and only 1 in 6 was in a wage employment. Indeed, Africa's economy is lagging, and we have to change that. From the impact of climate change to the economic disruptions stemming from the Russia-Ukraine war, which could push a further 2.1 million people on the African continent into extreme poverty by the end of this year, to the lingering impact of the pandemic, we find ourselves now at a critical juncture. The World Bank has projected that sub-Saharan Africa's economic growth will shrink from 4.1% in 2021 to 3.3% in 2022. Additionally, Africa is trailing behind other nations in the fourth industrial revolution. If the continent has any hope of using this moment to leapfrog, we must do so by developing and empowering our people. Most recently, experts from the African Union asserted that the continent needs to sustain annual growth rates of at least 7 to 10% over the next 40 years if the Sustainable Development Goals or Agenda 2063 are to be met. If we have any hope of meeting these metrics, human capacity development needs to be an utmost priority. So what is to be done? The World Bank has suggested key focus areas such as preventing and reversing damage to human capital in settings affected by fragility, conflict, and violence, and accelerating a demographic transition by empowering women and girls. But we also require a fundamental skills revolution. We have to prepare our population at the very start. This calls for an overhaul of our basic education structures so that we can become multidisciplinary, blending science and technology with social sciences for all our students. While part of the challenge is building technical skills to the huge swathe of the population that are unskilled, there's also a great emphasis on upskilling our existing body of skilled workers. This is where the work of Dr. Karisha and Dr. Salim has demonstrated how targeted training and capacity development can propel communities and nations to overcome interconnected challenges. If we don't take the right steps to educate, train, and retrain the workforce in Africa, there will be a serious shortage of talent, with the necessary fourth industrial revolution skills to fill the new jobs that are created. Fostering investment in human capital is crucial to meeting the challenges of globalization and digitization and their impacts on the workforce. We also have to diffuse technology. Technology should not just be restricted to one part of the world. Because if the COVID-19 has taught us is that the problem in one part of the globe is actually a problem in another part of the globe. So there is no reason for us to prevent other nations to get access to technology. Because if we do so, the Karims, the next pandemic, which shall happen, is just a question of when, is going to be as devastating as the one that we are just trying to get out of. We can use this moment to leapfrog. We certainly have the technological capabilities and the demographics to make this a reality. We have to change the structure of the global economy, as our Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, always says. It is our population that will be key to our growth story, but we need to ensure that the right support is in place. Once again, I congratulate Dr. Farisha Abdul Karim and Dr. Salim Abdul Karim, as well as the Global Guinea Worm Eradication Campaign, for this well-deserved award. Recognizing the achievements with the Hideyo Noguchi Africa Prize spotlights the importance of investing in people for health, for education, for gender equality, and for sustainable development. Thank you very much. Arigato gozaimashita.
Professor Mawala, thank you very much. So with this, we would like to conclude AFRI CONVERSE 2023 first special edition, Human Capital Development in Africa, commemorating the Hideyo Noguchi Africa Prize. And thank you very much for participating until the very end. And also I'd like to thank the speakers once again for participating in today's event. And those of you here today, please give these speakers a warm round of applause.